This is episode number 39 of DevOps Paradox with Darren Pope and Victor Farsick. I am Darren.
And I am Victor.
In today's episode, we're going to talk about one API to rule them all. And that would be?
Kube API. I mean, that's a silly question. We all know it.
So how does it rule everything? What's the right thing? We've talked about it a little bit, but we want to talk about it a little bit more.
I guess I should start with my theory that really Kubernetes, the main benefit of Kubernetes is not that it schedules containers. That's not really what distinguishes it from competitors, which are more or less dead. But it's the API. I'm biased, so I work with Kubernetes, mostly with Kubernetes for a while now. So I love its API and I love how it's extensible. And if I could do everything through that API, then my life, and I'm talking about my life only, would be so much easier. Because wouldn't it be great if we could avoid learning AWS and GCP and Azure and load balancers and all those things, which are all different APIs, different ways how to do stuff. If we can say, okay, Kubernetes API solves all my needs to instruct the system to do one thing or another. At least I think that would be kind of really, really awesome.
Yeah, I mean, think about the first time you installed an ingress in fill-in-the-blank thing. You didn't know that a load balancer was being spun up under the hood.
Exactly. And once you learn it, then you start thinking the other way around. I'm now thinking, I need a load balancer, therefore I need to create ingress.
Yeah. And when you start thinking that way, everything becomes software, whether it's hardware or not. And that's key. That's key. That's going to be, if you listen to our last episode about how important people are to a company, we're pretty harsh about it, right? If everything's being outsourced, if you're using a managed service provider to do all your things. But now, if the Kube API can actually do everything, if you can extend it to do the things that you need for your company, we'll use a phrase that I'm used to using. If you write a DSL around the Kube API to do your company specific things, how great is that?
That's probably the key aspect of Kubernetes design from day one, API and it being extensible. And I remember, I haven't tried, so I don't know how well or it does or doesn't work, but I've seen that VMware is now using Kube API or planning to use Kube API to manage their vSphere VMs. Awesome. I've seen announcements of, was it Mac Stadium or one of those that, we're using Kubernetes to schedule our Mac VMs or whatever they're using behind the hood. It's not really containers anymore. So in both of those examples, it's not about scheduling containers. It's about adopting that API to do stuff so that we don't deal with so many different complexities.
I mean, you go back and think about the ingress example again real quick. In a non-Kubernetes world, you'd say, hey, I need an endpoint added to my F5. So then you have to interact with the DNS team. You'd have to interact with the infrastructure team. You'd have to interact with the networking team. All of that goes away. Now, those three may still have to come together and come up with, okay, here's how we need it done within the company to meet compliance requirements. That's okay. But then it's done.
That's the key aspect is, let's say Ingress, I'm just going to roll with your example, right? And let's say that we are not using any of the standard for whatever reason. We are not in AWS or whatever. So if you're a team that provides that service, load balancing and certificates and what's or not, then you create your own extend Ingress in Kubernetes and create your own service and call it my company's Ingress. I don't really care. And actually, most people don't care because for most people, it's still, I'm creating Ingress. It happens to be your implementation of Ingress that you defined excellent, but I don't really care. I create Ingress and I expect X, Y, and Z to happen. And you define what that is. That's kind of that separation of concerns that we are missing and we have badly interpreted is I'm supposed to be able to do everything I need to do instead of you opening Jira tickets and assigning them to you, and you're supposed to create the mechanism in a way that can be used in a way that is understandable by everybody. And the only way to be understandable by everybody is by not every department, every group, every team coming up with a new way to do the same thing over and over again. Different API, UIs, whatever you're using.
It doesn't make sense to do that. I mean, people, this is, I think, one of the fallacies of, I've heard some people say this, is like, we want to give everybody the ability to do whatever they want. That's dumb. That's really dumb. Because you need to be able to, my opinion is, there needs to be one way to do something within the company. Now, at some point, that one way may get turned into two because there's enough of a variation that it becomes two. And that's okay. But to say that anybody can do anything that they want, how the heck do you manage that? It just doesn't make any sense to me.
And it's the same thing like, if you're designing application, we all agree that we're going to use REST HTTP-based API, or maybe GraphQL or something. I mean, there are three variations, and everything else is considered obsolete, part of the history and all those things. And there is nothing wrong with that. And that does not really hinder innovation. So you can still define your HTTP REST API with all the fields you need. It's just that we all agree that we're going to use that. Right. So it's more about agreeing on a base way how to do things, not really agreeing on all the details, because that will definitely vary and change over time. Actually, from my part, the fascination of all this, I was fascinated with external usages of Kube API for a while now. But what really got me thinking is, and this will sound as a commercial, but it's not because I will talk about open source now fully, is that I discovered a product called Crossplane. I don't know if you've heard about that. And it's awesome. It's very early beta alpha. I don't know what version it is. I don't use it in production yet. But Crossplane IO, I think, the idea is to be able to create Kubernetes resources that will do things like what we spoke about before, like load balancers or database as a service, basically anything in any cloud provider, even on-prem, using Kube API, without even mentioning containers in any formal way. So I played around with that project, and it's really, really cool. I really like it. I don't think it's ready. I don't think it's there. The world will not adopt it today. But it's one of those ideas that I rarely see these days ideas that say, oh, man, I would be there.
Yeah, I've looked at Crossplane a little bit. They sort of re-leverage the term stacks. So if you think about, even though we've talked about full stack developers, there is no such thing. There is such a thing as a stack. So if you know you're building an app and you're going to use Node for your front end, you're going to use some Java stuff for middle tier, and you're using Mongo or Rethink for the DB, that's a stack, right? And that's fine for an application stack. They've taken that and modified it to, or extended that to the point to where the stack is not just the app, but everything else around the app that supports it. And it's a very interesting strategy. And it's nothing new. They're just building on top of what's now available. Could this have been done a couple of years ago? No. This is just now becoming viable.
Exactly, because big part of the work that they would normally need to do is already done for them, and that's Kube API. That's the complex thing. They're just building boxes that they're putting inside it. And that's what allows them to be fast and with few people, I would guess. And for me as a user, just another Kubernetes CRD.
So what would be the coolest thing that you think you could do with the Kube API?
Personally, the first thing I would like to see is to replace my Terraform scripts with Kubernetes YAML files. That's what I would like to see. So create a cluster, create Redis service, whatever you're doing today with Terraform, I would like to do that with Kubernetes API.
So the only thing you couldn't do with that would be the actual creation of the control plane. The only thing you would need what we'll call classic Terraform for would be creating the control plane, and then everything else would go through the control plane.
Exactly. So I would need a control plane, but that control plane can be running on my laptop for all I know. But yes.
Well, that's a scary thought. I didn't even think about that.
I mean, it's not really a big deal. It's already there. You're having full-blown Kubernetes in Minikube, and all I'm asking actually is to reduce it. I need less for that Terraform example.
Right, because Minikube has a worker node baked as well, so you don't need that part of it.
Exactly.
I don't know what my favorite thing would be. Maybe place a fast food order.
Oh, in my case, that would be that already exists in Kubernetes. That would be a Kubernetes cron job, because I need it every day, a specific time. It would be a cron job.
Be a cron job that makes a call to a pizza order, right? It's a Pizza Hut call. You have a Pizza Hut CRD. No,
it would need to be like, 5, 6 of them, and then randomly choosing one with predefined order.
So you're just surprised.
Exactly.
I wonder if somebody's going to listen to this and it's like, oh, I could write that. But again, that has nothing to do with Kubernetes as we know it today.
Kubernetes is an API that is highly extensible, and through custom resource definitions can be extended to create any type of resources. That's Kubernetes API that we know. What is kind of more confusing or less used today is all those things being used in ways completely unrelated with containers, because most of real usage of Kubernetes ends up being slave to a container one way or another. If I need to use Terraform, going back to the previous example, to create a Kubernetes cluster, and from there on everything will be done through kubectl, then I can just as well remove that first step.
You would just need one, and then you could have it generate everything else.
Yeah.
Sounds like Skynet, though, to me. It's like, make the request and stuff happens.
It's more about the process itself and the way how we define things. But, what that YAML definition is can be anything still. It just needs to follow the formatting rules of Kubernetes, but it would not really hinder innovation in any form of way, I think. Which is my main concern always when we say, everything needs to be... If I say everything needs to be Terraform, then we are much more limited, for example, in what it can do. But Kube API can do almost anything. It's just pub/sub machine.
It's really smart in how it interprets what to do, but in actuality, it's really dumb.
You send a request that you receive acknowledgement that request goes in a queue and is processed by one or more resources that somebody defined and are listening to those types of requests. And what those listeners are can be anything, really, literally anything. Any process you can imagine. And like lately, what I've been tinkering with is doing chaos engineering, and I quickly fall into doing it from Kubernetes simply because it's more comfortable for me, even though most of those experiments I'm working on right now are completely unrelated with Kubernetes. It's just shutting down data center in AWS. So no, it's not directly related with Kubernetes. And yet, for me, it's more comfortable to do it using Kube API.
Chaos is a lot of fun.
You just heard, actually, I was not supposed to, you just heard the topic of the next course for the first time, including you, Darren.
Yeah, I know. Joy. More chaos to my life. But that's okay. Chaos is chaos. But Kube API as that one API to rule them all, that just sounds like too far of a stretch, but in reality, it's not. If what you've heard that VMware is doing that already, if that is true, that makes complete sense. I mean, you think about what ESX is. It's containers, but not containers. You have guests running on hosts. That sounds like pods running on worker nodes. It's the same model, just a different implementation. So why not use the same control plane?
99% of the stuff is going to continue being the same with vSphere, right?
Yeah.
It's just different mechanism to accept your input as a human or a machine, what you want to do. So API is the only change, really, in that announcement.
Yeah, because I can't tell you the number of times, going back to the previous episode, to where I've got to open a Jira ticket to get a VM spun up so I can do work. Well, now, even if that ESX team had self-serviced that, right, through some PowerShell commands, which is the way you can interact with ESX, it's still not super clean. But now all that goes away.
Now, here's the real issue, and tell me how often you experience the same thing. But at least when I visit companies, you need certificates, and then they say somebody goes to a wiki page, and these are the instructions how to create certificates in the system called A. And then, we need this as well. And then some other team created something completely different. I mean, different way to interact with. Not what's in the background is different in any case, right? And then companies have like hundreds of different APIs or interfaces. It can be UI, right? To interact and create different things. And managing all that and remembering, that's why everybody has so many wiki pages, because every single detail you need to do is done differently. And just let me clarify, this is important. When I say differently, I don't mean what's done behind the scene. Behind the scene can be as different as you want. But the way how to interact with that can be unified.
Yeah, a common API is hugely important for making good progress. Let's say there is a common API for, well, in fact, there already is. Just using Kubernetes as it stands today, if you're doing nothing more than ingress and just a couple of simple things. If you were to leave your company and go to another company, the way you install an ingress is the same at company B as it was at company A. There's no difference, right? So that's already just sort of naturally baked into the process. That's assuming you're actually the companies are doing the right things, which that's pretty rare and far in between. I think Crossplane's hitting on it from the right concept. It's an API wrapper around Kube API to do all the things. Well, it's CRDs and stuff, but it's what it is, right?
Yeah, but it goes a bit more than that. So you can say, for example, for every infrastructure-related thing, I can have Terraform as my API or CLI or whatever it is. And I think that's better for me than using CloudFormation for AWS and then whatever is Azure and then whatever is Google and so on and so forth. So Terraform to rule them all, I like it. But I still get annoyed because I want a load balancer. And the only thing that I'm reusing in Terraform to create load balancers in different places is that the syntax is same Ruby-like syntax. But it's completely different. And I really don't care. I want a bloody load balancer. Just create me a load balancer. And you should know how to interact with Amazon instead of Google. So that type of unification I would like to see. I know that it will never be exactly the same arguments, parameters, and stuff like that. But the differences between playbooks in Terraform for different providers are just too huge. I need to learn each of them by heart, even though actually most of the... Like, take Kubernetes as an example, manage Kubernetes. most of the things I'm specifying are essentially the same. How many nodes I have? Do I want auto-scaling? What is the size of VMs and stuff like that? And yet the syntax is completely different for all of them.
And here's where Terraform does fall down. Again, nothing against Terraform, but new feature comes out from fill-in-the-blank provider. It takes time to get that in there. And if I'm wanting to do that day 1, day 2, I can't get it that fast, typically. So then I'm stuck having to use console, native CLI, whatever, to do the things I need to do right then. You would still have the same problem in Kube API at that point too, because you'd have to have a CRD to do that thing.
Delays are almost inevitable because each provider will do things natively their way first, and then it takes a while to come there. But at least we can somehow simplify. And simplifying, now I'm thinking aloud, maybe actually most people don't have that problem. Maybe I'm just having that problem because I work with many different providers and stuff like that. And maybe most people are there stuck with one provider, whatever it is, and they don't really care about those things. That could be the case.
Well, that opens up another can of worms that we'll save for another day. But if you're running everything on a single provider, is that the best thing for business continuity for you?
It almost certainly is not. But on the other hand, I can, and actually the answer is no, very clear answer. But I could also say, is it worthwhile investment?
And the answer is probably going to be no.
Because you cannot, if you're stuck with on-prem, you're going cloud, and going from nothing straight into a couple of different providers, that's not going to result in anything good. You're going to have enough trouble getting into one of them. And it takes years for an average enterprise to get to AWS, Azure, Google, whatever they're using. Going from nothing to all of them,
That's probably a good place to wrap for today. Kube API. One API to rule them all.
Yes. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if, 5 years from now, the main thing about Kubernetes is not containers, but Kube API stays.
Well, you're already sort of seeing that in a weird way with OpenShift. Like OpenShift 4 doesn't ship with Docker. Now, it still can run containers, but...
It's still containers.
It's still containers.
But let's say that tomorrow and I'm not saying that will happen, but we move into some lightweight VMs that turn up to be better than containers. It's not going to be containers forever. But API, also Kube API will not last forever. Nothing lasts forever. But here is my prediction. Kube API is going to outlast Kubernetes scheduling engine for containers.
That's a pretty bold prediction. We'll see. I don't know. I'm a coin flip on that one because they're tightly bound enough, but they're also loosely coupled enough. Just like, It'll be the next big thing. Well, we've talked about it before. Serverless is going to be the next big thing on Kubernetes, right? So then Kubernetes is still nothing. So then does it matter? Today's serverless on Kubernetes, although good, I can see it being much better.
Oh yeah, it's only the beginning. I'm not even 100% sure that containers in the current way are the best place for serverless, but we'll get there. And that's another subject.
If you'd like to make some comments about this episode, you can reach out to us. Our contact information is in the show notes below. It's at devopsparadox.com/contact. Leave us a Voxer message. We didn't mention it last time, but if you're interested in learning about Canary deployments, go out to Udemy. You can search for Canary deployments. Look for Victor's name too. There'll be a link. I'll include the link to it as well. One API to rule them all. If you were to task people with one thing this year, would it be to learn how to interact with the Kube API? Know how kubectl works? Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I'm not sure yet.
Okay. It's still January, so that's fine. Okay, let me rephrase the question. Should you be learning Kubernetes this year?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Don't. Yeah, there is no doubt. It affects absolutely everybody. Now, the only question is whether depending on what your interests are, what is the level of learning you should do. That's the thing. If you're a Node.js developer, maybe like a couple of days is enough.
If you're an operations person,
5 years.
5 years. Yeah, I can already see the recruiters coming out. Hey, we need somebody with 10 years of Kubernetes experience and 25 years of Java, and oh, by the way, we're only going to pay $20,000 a year for that. That's another conversation for yet another day. Okay, well, that pretty much wraps this episode. Thanks for listening to episode number 39, A DevOps Paradox.